They were prepared to meet monsters. That's what they'd been told their entire lives, that American soldiers were savage beasts who butchered prisoners and spat on honor. Yet when 47 Japanese women stepped onto American soil in the autumn of 1945, the first thing that stunned them wasn't cruelty, it was beauty. They froze at the sight of the American soldiers waiting on the dock, tall, clean, radiant in the California sunlight. One of the women gasped before she could stop herself and whispered, "They look like actors from the cinema." Another sharply silenced her, but it was too late. The thought had escaped. It would spread like a quiet fire among them, unsettling everything they believed about their enemy. Because this was the moment the lies began to fall apart. If you want stories that peel back the forgotten layers of World War II, revealing the human truth buried beneath propaganda and history books, stay with me. This is one of those stories.
The ship creaked as it crawled into San Francisco Bay, its steel hull still stained with Pacific salt. On the deck stood 47 Japanese women arranged in two uneasy lines, their uniforms rumpled from weeks at sea. Some were barely more than girls at 18, others had already seen too much of life at 25. They had served across the scattered islands of Japan's fallen empire, Saipan, Okinawa, the Philippines. They weren't soldiers, yet they had lived through the war just the same. They were nurses who treated the dying, radio operators who heard battle cries turn to static, clerks who watched commands turn to evacuations, and now they were prisoners. Months earlier, they had stood in stunned silence when the Emperor's voice came over the radio, brittle and trembling, announcing surrender. In that moment, a lifetime of worship shattered. Everything they had been taught to believe about loyalty and death collapsed in a single breath. They had not died for the Empire. They had survived, and that survival felt like treason. Now the war was over, and they were being carried across the ocean to the land they had been raised to hate. As the engines powered down and the ship drifted into the quiet of harbor, the women stared at the coastline of their enemy, a nation untouched by war, still whole. None of them could have known that their journey was not really about captivity. It was about unlearning everything they thought they knew. A cool September breeze swept across the bay as the gangway slammed onto the dock with a hollow metallic bang. The women flinched at the sound, bracing for shouts, for violence, anything to match the terror they had carried with them across the Pacific. But none came. American sailors worked methodically along the deck, their voices relaxed, almost conversational. No one barked orders. No one struck a prisoner. There was no chaos, only ordinary discipline. Then they saw them. Lined up on the pier stood rows of American soldiers, motionless in formation. At first, the women could only stare. The soldiers were enormous. Broad shoulders, straight backs, crisp uniforms that looked freshly pressed. Their boots gleamed. Their hair was trimmed. Their faces were clean and calm, even handsome. Some smoked casually, exhaling thin threads of smoke into the afternoon sun, as if none of this, war, surrender, defeat, was strange to them at all. They looked nothing like the grotesque savages in Japanese propaganda posters. They didn't have fangs or crazed eyes. They didn't look wild. They looked confident. Ko, a former field nurse, felt her chest tighten with disbelief. Beside her, Yuki whispered in shock, "Are we sure these are soldiers?" They look like film actors. A sharp grip clamped around Yuki's wrist. "Don't say that," Kiko hissed. "Someone will hear you." But it was too late. The thought was alive now, passing silently between them. Nothing made sense anymore. An American officer walked up the gangway, tall, composed, hair silvering at the temples. When he spoke, his voice carried authority, but not threat. "You will disembark in single file and follow the marked path. You will not be harmed." A Japanese-American translator repeated his words. Hearing their language spoken with an unfamiliar American rhythm was unsettling, like a mirror reflecting a face they almost recognized, but not quite. One by one, the women descended the gangway. Ko's legs trembled, not from weakness, but from the unbearable uncertainty of what waited below. When her foot touched the dock, she half expected a rifle butt or a shouted insult. Instead, a young American soldier met her eyes and gave a single respectful nod. No smile, No mockery, just acknowledgement. The smallest act. The first fracture in a lifetime of fear. They were herded onto buses and driven inland. Through the windows, the women stared in silence at America. Cars moving freely, buildings untouched, shop windows unbroken. A living city. A world untouched by war. Across from Ko, Yuki whispered, "Is this really a country that just fought a war?" Their destination was Camp Stoneman, a military processing center. They expected interrogation, humiliation. Instead, they found paperwork, lines, typewriters, questions asked in polite, methodical tones. Name, age, hometown, unit assignment. It felt absurd, like they had crossed an ocean just to fill out forms. Then came the medical exams. Fear returned like a fist tightening around the room. Stories of what happened to captured women during war. Stories spoken only in terrified whispers, rushed back. But the nurses who entered were women. American women in clean white uniforms. One approached Ko. Middle-aged, steady hands, eyes that held no hostility. "I'm going to check your health," she said through the translator. Ko didn't respond. She couldn't. The nurse examined her hands, calloused and scarred from years of field work. Instead of judgment, her expression softened. "You've worked hard," she said. No one had said that to Ko in years. Then the nurse did the unthinkable. She treated a cut on Ko's palm, gently, carefully, and handed her a small tube of ointment. "For you," she said. "Use it twice a day." Ko stared down at the medicine. A gift. To a prisoner. From the enemy. It was the first kindness she had received since the war began. And she had no idea what to do with it. After the medical inspection came another surprise. Showers. Real showers. The women hesitated at the doorway. Steam rising, rows of metal shower heads, stacks of clean towels, no guards shouting, no threats. Just a female sergeant who said through the translator, "Take your time. Take your time." Those words didn't exist in war. Ko turned the handle. A burst of hot water poured over her like something holy. She hadn't felt real heat in over a year, not in the caves of Okinawa, not in field hospitals where water came cold from metal drums. Around her, women began to cry, silently, desperately, as months of salt, sweat, and fear dissolved into the drain. The lavender scent of American soap filled the air. They had braced themselves to be stripped of their dignity. Instead, they were given it back. They were given uniforms next. Not prison rags, but simple work clothes. Sturdy, clean. Meant for people, not prisoners. And then came the meal. The mess hall was enormous, loud with voices and clattering pans. But above everything was the smell. Food. The line moved forward, and each tray was piled high by indifferent cooks. Mashed potatoes, turkey with gravy, green beans, bread rolls, fruit salad with bright red cherries floating in syrup. Ko stared down at her tray. It didn't feel like food. It felt like wealth. She ate slowly, tasting disbelief with every bite. Across from her, a girl no older than 19 touched her bread roll like it might disappear. At the end of the table, a woman named Michiko began to shake, then cry openly as she ate. A nearby American soldier noticed and approached a translator. "Is she hurt?" The translator spoke to Michiko. She answered through tears. "She says the food is good. She hasn't tasted food like this in years," the translator explained. The soldier nodded once, then said nothing more. He didn't laugh. He didn't gloat. He just walked away, letting her cry. That night they slept in real beds, mattresses, blankets, pillows. Some women stayed awake just to feel the softness beneath them. Others wept quietly in the dark, not from sadness, but from something worse. They had expected torment, but mercy was far more dangerous, because mercy demanded they ask a question they had been forbidden to ask. What if the enemy wasn't evil? Days at Camp Stoneman settled into a rhythm that felt unreal, like stepping out of war and into someone else's life. A bell rang at 6 each morning, not screaming at them like military whistles in Japan, but simply ringing. Breakfast followed. Eggs, toast, sometimes bacon. Real coffee, real sugar. Ko couldn't remember the last time she had tasted sweetness. She nearly cried over a spoonful of it. After breakfast came work assignments. Nothing resembled punishment. No forced labor, no guards barking orders. Each woman was given a role based loosely on her experience. Some worked laundry, others in the kitchen. Some did clerical work alongside American typists. Ko, with her nursing background, was sent to the camp hospital. There she touched medicine again, real medicine that wasn't powdered dust or expired. There were no shortages, no desperate rationing, no treating wounds with boiled rags. Bandages here were white. Tools were sterilized. Supplies were endless. The American nurses treated her as if she actually mattered. They didn't smile excessively or try to befriend her, but they respected her work. They taught her new procedures. They corrected her errors gently.
They asked about her training in Japan, not to mock, but to understand. Lieutenant Sarah Morrison, a red-haired nurse with a calm voice, often worked beside Ko. "You have steady hands," she remarked one afternoon while they wrapped a soldier's sprained wrist. "Most nurses panic when someone bleeds. You don't." Ko hesitated. Praise was something she hadn't heard in years. "In Japan," she said quietly, "there was no time for panic." Sarah studied her for a moment, then nodded. "War teaches different lessons to all of us, I guess." It wasn't until later that Ko realized what made those words different. Sarah had not spoken to her as an American to an enemy. She had spoken to her as one human to another, as if survival could be a shared language. By the second week, the women had been issued camp currency, small paper notes they could spend in the commissary. When Ko walked inside for the first time, she froze in disbelief. Shelves of soap, notebooks, combs, perfume, magazines, and chocolate, Hershey's. She held the bar in both hands like something sacred. Around her, the other women picked up lipstick, shoes, shampoo, holding each item with reverence. They were prisoners. Why were they being given choices? Every day in the camp delivered the same quiet message. You are not here to suffer. But the more kindness they received, the heavier a new burden grew in their hearts. Guilt. Because every letter from home whispered the same truth. Japan was starving, and they were not. The first letters arrived in late October, thin envelopes marked by censor stamps, worn from their long journey across the Pacific. Mail calls spread through the camp like a pulse, quiet, then frantic. Women who had been silent for weeks suddenly trembled as their names were called. Ko received one. The handwriting was familiar, uneven, and warm. Her younger sister, Aiko. "Sister, Tokyo is gone. Our neighborhood is nothing but ashes. Mother and I sleep beside strangers in a shelter built from scrap wood. Food is scarce. We eat rice once a day, sometimes only once every 2 days. Father is gone. He became sick in the winter and there was no medicine. Please come home if you can. We miss you." Aiko Ko read the letter 3 times. The ink dissolved into blurs. She had walked streets of broken cities. She had treated soldiers who died hungry. But seeing her sister's suffering in writing made it real in a way no battlefield ever had. That night, dinner felt like a crime. She sat in front of a full tray, stew, bread, peaches, and syrup, and could not eat. Her stomach clenched at the thought of swallowing while her mother starved on the other side of the ocean. She wasn't alone. Across the mess hall, women stared down at food they once devoured. Now the abundance made them sick. Micho whispered, "How can we eat when they have nothing?" No one had an answer. Some women began skipping meals, folding bread rolls into napkins to save them. Others traded their rations for extra paper and envelopes to send letters home. But no matter what they did, guilt followed like a shadow. How could life feel gentle here while their families drowned in ruin? Every act of kindness from their captors now felt like a weight. Comfort had become a quiet form of pain, because guilt, unlike hunger, doesn't starve you. It eats you slowly. By November, something unthinkable began to happen. The enemy started to feel familiar. At first, it was only nods between them and the guards, small gestures of acknowledgement. Then came words, broken words, strange accents. "Ohio," one guard tried. "Not Ohio. Ohio," a woman corrected shyly. He laughed at himself and tried again. "Oh, hi, yo." The women hid their smiles, but inside something loosened. One guard, Private James Cooper from Texas, became a daily presence. Tall, sun-browned, always wearing a lopsided grin, he treated his patrol shift like a neighborly walk. He wasn't loud or flirtatious, just unmistakably kind. "Hope y'all are doing all right today," he'd say, speaking slowly so the translator could keep up. "If you need anything, just holler." It was such a casual offer that the women didn't know what to do with it. They had never heard a soldier speak like that, like someone who didn't need power to feel strong. Inside the barracks at night, the whispers returned. Only now, they weren't about fear. "Did you see the guard with the blue eyes? Do you think all American men are that tall? Why do their teeth shine like that? They eat meat every day. That must be why." Co listened but didn't join in. She was too busy studying something else entirely. The Americans looked unbroken. No hollow eyes, no war-thin faces, no ration lines. Their uniforms fit. Their boots were new. Their country, their soldiers, their lives had never been reduced to survival. They had fought a war without losing themselves, and that, more than any weapon, might have been why they had won. The barracks had grown warmer with routine, but beneath the surface, tension simmered like a pot about to boil over. Survival had given them time to think, and thinking was dangerous. The fight began over something small, as most eruptions do. Hannah mentioned, almost casually, that she had laughed after Private Cooper showed her a photograph of his dog. Just a silly moment, nothing more. "You laughed with the enemy?" snapped Tomoko, one of the older women, her voice tight with controlled fury. Hannah stiffened. "He was being friendly, that's all. He is not your friend," Tomoko shot back. "Do you think a smile erases what they did to our country, to our people?" The room went still. Every woman froze mid-motion. Yuki set down her comb and turned. "And what about what we did?" she asked quietly. Tomoko's head snapped toward her. "Watch your words." "No," Yuki said, voice suddenly strong. "Someone needs to say it. Japan invaded other countries. Japan killed civilians. Japan started this war. And when it was over, what did they do? They abandoned us to die on those islands." Tomoko stood. "We served with honor." "Honor?" Yuki's eyes flashed. "Was it honor when our commanders told us to kill ourselves rather than surrender? To die like animals in caves? To starve in silence?" Silence. "They told us Americans would torture us," Yuki continued, gesturing around the barracks. "But look where we are, fed, clothed, alive. Who saved us? Not Japan." Tomoko's fists trembled. "You are a disgrace to your country." Yuki met her glare without fear. "I lost my country the day I saw the truth," she said. "And I would rather live with truth than die with lies." No one spoke after that, but the crack in their unity had been made. And once truth enters a room, it never leaves quietly.
In late November, the women were taken beyond the fences of Camp Stoneman for the first time. Under guard supervision, they were assigned community work details, mostly harmless labor that posed no risk of escape. Co was part of a small group sent to a church in a nearby town. The church basement smelled of coffee and floor polish, and American hymns drifted faintly through the walls. Rows of long tables were covered with socks, canned food, chocolate bars, and handwritten letters. "Care packages," the translator explained, "for American soldiers still overseas." Co hesitated before taking a seat. She had packed boxes before, in military tunnels lit by oil lamps, filling crates with morphine and bandages for dying men. But here, the atmosphere was different. The work felt human. The women were joined by church volunteers, older American women in soft dresses and hats. One of them, Mrs. Henderson, had silver hair and hands that moved with practiced kindness. "You girls are doing wonderfully," she said through the translator, offering a warm smile. "Thank you for helping." The Japanese women stiffened. Gratitude from an American for prisoners. During a break, Mrs. Henderson brought out tea and a plate of shortbread cookies, real porcelain cups, real sugar. Co held the teacup as though it might break if she breathed wrong. Mrs. Henderson sat beside her. "Do you have family back home?" Co hesitated, then nodded once. "You must miss them." The words were simple, soft, genuine. Something in Co cracked. These people, these women, were supposed to hate her, fear her, spit on her as a symbol of the enemy. Instead, they poured her tea. On the truck ride back to camp, Michiko stared out the window at quiet American streets and tidy porch lights. "They don't understand war," she said bitterly. "These people have never been hungry." Ko didn't disagree, but something deeper had settled in her mind. "No," she murmured. "Maybe they never had to become monsters to survive." Michiko frowned. "What do you mean?" Ko watched a family inside a brightly lit house sit down together for dinner. "I think," she said slowly, "mercy is a luxury of those who still remember what it means to be human." One cold evening, guards announced something that sent a ripple of confusion through the barracks. A movie night. The women exchanged skeptical looks. A movie? For prisoners? Curiosity won. That night they filed into the recreation hall where a white sheet hung against the wall and rows of metal chairs faced a single projector. The room darkened. The machine rattled to life. Color filled the screen. Not the gray war-stained tones they knew, but blazing color. Blue dresses, gold chandeliers, red stage curtains, a Hollywood musical. The story itself was simple. People falling in love, dancing under city lights, but none of that mattered. What stunned the women was the feeling of the film. It was bold, fearless, overflowing with a joy that felt alien after years of war. The men on screen stood tall in tuxedos, laughing without shame or caution. The women wore silk gowns that sparkled like stars. The actors moved as if life were something to be celebrated, not endured. For the Japanese women, it was like peering into another universe. In the glow of the screen, Yuki whispered, "Look at them. They live like the war never touched them." Ko said nothing, but inside she felt something heavy sink in her stomach. Then came a scene that froze her. The leading man appeared in a military uniform, clean, proud, handsome. He looked exactly like the American soldiers on the docks of San Francisco. The realization hit her like a wave. This is who they are. Even in fantasy, even in stories, they see themselves as strong. Japan had built its war on sacrifice and death. America had built its power on confidence, on the belief that tomorrow would be better than today. That belief gave them something Japan never had, an unbreakable spirit. When the lights came on, several women wiped tears from their cheeks, not from sadness, but from the crushing weight of understanding. "How did we ever think we could win?" someone whispered. No one answered, because now they all knew the truth. Japan had been fighting a nation that never doubted its own victory. The movie had done something no battle could. It shattered their certainty. That night, back in the barracks, the whispers rose again, but now they carried the weight of truth. "I don't understand," Hannah murmured, sitting on the edge of her bunk. "How could our leaders think we could win a war against a country like that?" "They told us Japan was the strongest nation on earth," said another. "They said we were chosen." "They said Americans were weak," someone else whispered. Ko lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling. Weak. That word echoed inside her. No, Americans weren't weak. Their strength was just built differently. It didn't come from worshiping death or blind obedience. It came from believing in their right to live well, to live freely. It came from hope, from possibility, from abundance. For the first time, the women began to speak openly about the lies. "They told us surrender was worse than death," Michiko said quietly, "but we surrendered, and we are still human." "They told us Americans had no honor," said Hannah, "but they fed us. They said we would be tortured," Yuki added, "but we were shown mercy." The silence that followed was suffocating. It was Tomoko, the hardest of them, who finally spoke what they were all thinking. "Then what was it all for?" she whispered, her voice cracking for the first time. "All those men who died, for what?" No one had an answer. But in that moment they knew. The war had not just destroyed Japan. It had stolen the truth from them. The moment came quietly. It was early December when a young American soldier was rushed into the camp hospital. Training accident, deep gash along his forearm, bleeding heavily. Lieutenant Morrison called for Ko without hesitation. "Gloves on. Clean the wound first," Sarah instructed, voice calm but urgent. Ko's hands moved automatically. Sterilize, clean, wrap, pressure. She had done this hundreds of times before, on soldiers whose names she never knew, whose cries still haunted her sleep. But this time felt different, because this soldier flinched when she touched his arm, because his breathing shook with pain, because when their eyes met, he looked afraid, not of her rank, not of death, of pain. He was human. When she finished bandaging, the young man exhaled shakily and managed a quiet, breathless, "Thank you." His accent wrapped around the English words slowly as if he wanted to make sure she understood. Ko froze. No prisoner on earth had ever been thanked for surviving, and yet here she was, an enemy nurse being thanked by an enemy soldier. She swallowed and forced the unfamiliar words past her lips. "You are welcome," she replied in careful English. For a moment, the war didn't exist. Afterward, as Ko restocked supplies, Sarah Morrison joined her. "You did good," she said simply. Ko hesitated, then asked, almost in a whisper, "In Japan, we were taught Americans had no honor, no mercy." Sarah didn't laugh. She didn't argue. She just looked tired. "We were told a lot of things, too," she said softly. "Hate makes it easier to fight, but it makes it harder to live after." Ko stood still, absorbing the words. It wasn't a political statement. It wasn't victory or defeat. It was just truth, spoken by someone who had survived the cost of war. Ko realized then, propaganda didn't end when bullets stopped flying. It lingered like smoke, clouding minds long after peace. And she made a decision. She would no longer breathe that smoke. That night, Ko could not sleep. The barracks was quiet, broken only by the soft breathing of exhausted women and the distant hum of trucks beyond the fence. But her mind was no longer quiet. It was awake, alive with questions she didn't know how to silence. She reached beneath her cot and pulled out a small notebook she had bought with her camp wages. Hands trembling, she opened it to a blank page and began to write, not for anyone else, but for herself. "I am not who I was when I arrived here. I believed surrender was shame. I believed America was a land of monsters. I believed we would be punished without mercy. But today a wounded American soldier thanked me. He looked at me not as an enemy, but as a person. And I saw fear in his eyes, the same fear I have seen in the eyes of Japanese soldiers. If the enemy can fear, then the enemy can feel. If he can feel, then he is human." She paused, her breath unsteady. If what I was taught about the Americans was a lie, then what else was a lie? Was honor only real if it ended in death? Was loyalty only proven through suffering? Why did they ask us to die for something they knew we could not win? The words on the page terrified her. They were dangerous thoughts, thoughts that would have led to imprisonment or death back home. But the truth demanded to exist, and once written, it refused to be erased.
Across the barracks, Yuki turned in her sleep and murmured something in English, a language that was no longer foreign to her. Ko watched her friend for a long moment. Yuki had embraced the new world quickly. Others, like Tomoko, resisted it with every breath. Ko understood both of them now. She finished her entry. "I do not know what I believe anymore, but I know I will not go back to believing lies." She closed the notebook and held it against her chest. For the first time since the war began, Ko did not feel defeated. She felt free. Spring came quietly to Camp Stoneman, carried by rumors that soon became fact. The women were going home. Home. The word should have filled them with joy, but instead it unsettled them. Home was no longer a place they could picture. Home was rubble, hunger, silence. On the morning of departure, they gathered their belongings, small bundles of letters, camp clothing, a few precious items bought at the commissary, a mirror, a bar of soap, a single chocolate bar saved for someone waiting in Japan. Things that would be unremarkable anywhere else, but in Japan would be miracles. When they reached the docks of San Francisco again, American soldiers lined up to see them off. Some of the women bowed, some waved, some cried openly. Private Cooper stood among them, hands in his pockets, eyes softer than usual. "Y'all take care now," he said to no one and everyone at once. As the ship pulled away, a strange grief settled over them. They were not sad to leave captivity. They were sad to leave kindness. For months they had lived not as enemies, but as people. They didn't know if they would ever be treated that way again. The Pacific crossing felt longer this time, heavy with dread.
When Japan finally appeared on the horizon, no one cheered. Yokohama looked like a skeleton of a city. Charred beams, twisted steel, scorched concrete. The war had ended, but the destruction had not. Ko traveled north toward Tokyo, walking part of the distance when there were no trains. She passed through miles of ruins, whole neighborhoods swallowed by ash and hunger. Smoke still drifted from broken homes. Children dug through debris for scrap metal to sell. She found Aiko and her mother in a settlement of tin and wood scraps. Her sister looked like a shadow, cheeks hollow, hair brittle, eyes tired. But when she saw Ko, she cried out and ran to her. "You're alive," Aiko sobbed. "I thought you were gone." Their mother emerged slowly, frail but alive. They embraced for a long time, 3 lives tied back together by something stronger than war. That night, Ko learned the truth she had feared. Her father had died during the winter, pneumonia, no medicine, no strength left to fight. Ko sat in the darkness of their shelter, listening to the wind thread through cracks in the metal walls. She had come home, but nothing felt familiar. The hardest part of war, she now understood, wasn't fighting it. The hardest part was coming back from it. The years that followed were slow and hard, but Japan began to rebuild itself, piece by broken piece. Ko worked any job she could find at first, cleaning, sorting scrap metal, sewing, until she finally found her way back to the only calling that had ever made sense to her, caring for others. She became a teacher. Her classroom was a patched-up room with cracked windows and borrowed desks. Her students were war orphans, children who had seen too much too young. They sat with quiet eyes and empty stomachs, but they listened to her, not because she demanded it, but because she spoke to them gently, the way someone had once spoken to her when she was lost between worlds. She married a carpenter who had survived the war with scars of his own. Together they built a small house outside Tokyo, the kind of place where flowers could grow again. They had 3 children. Life no longer felt like a battlefield. It felt like a promise. But Ko never forgot America. Not the base, not the soldiers, not the shock of being treated with dignity by people she was raised to hate. The memory of that experience lived inside her, not as a debt, but as a responsibility. She had seen too much to allow lies to grow again. When her children grew old enough to ask about the war, she did what few in Japan dared to do in those years of silence. She told them the truth, not the one from textbooks, not the one from government speeches, the truth she had seen with her own eyes. War will always ask you to hate, she told them. But hate is a chain. It makes you obedient. It makes you blind. The only way to break that chain is to see your enemy as human. Her children listened, not with fear, but with understanding. They would never look at the world the same way again, and that, she knew, was how peace truly survived. Not in treaties, but in people. Years later, long after the ruins of Tokyo had been rebuilt and memories of war faded into history books, Ko would still think about the day she first stepped onto that pier in San Francisco Bay. She remembered the shock in her chest, the wind off the water, the line of American soldiers standing impossibly tall in perfect uniforms beneath a golden sky, the moment when everything she had been taught collided with the truth. They looked like movie stars, the women had whispered. But that was never what truly stunned them. It wasn't their height, or their uniforms, or even their calm confidence. It was their choice. America had won the war. They had every reason to treat their enemies with contempt, to humiliate them, to punish them, to make them feel small. But instead, they had shown something far more powerful than dominance: restraint. They fed those women. They clothed them. They treated their wounds and allowed them to heal, not just their bodies, but their minds. They showed them that strength and cruelty are not the same thing, that mercy is not weakness. It is power under control. Ko carried that lesson for the rest of her life. Victory is not measured by how many enemies you destroy, she once told her daughter, but by how many enemies you turn into humans again, even if only in your own heart. The war had broken nations. It had broken families. It had broken faith. But in a camp thousands of miles from home, Ko had discovered a truth that would carry her through the rest of her days. It is easy to hate. Anyone can do that. But to remain human, even toward your enemy, that is real strength. History isn't just battles and dates. It's people. People who were told what to believe. People who were forced to choose between hate and humanity. People like Ko, who walked into enemy hands expecting cruelty and found something that changed her forever. And stories like hers remind us of a truth the world too easily forgets. Even in war, mercy matters. If this story opened your eyes or made you feel something you didn't expect, then stay with this channel. There are more buried histories like this, more truths worth digging up, more humanity worth remembering, because the past isn't over. It still teaches if we are willing to listen.